After a night of intimate entanglement, Theodore Spencer handed her divorce papers the next day. At that time, Rosalie Yang was already 2 months pregnant. "Cynthia is back," he said. Theodore and Cynthia Zeller had been childhood sweethearts for many years. Rosalie was Theodore's teenage sweetheart. However, when his first love returned, Rosalie couldn't compete. She didn't try to keep him. She just turned and left, allowing him to fulfill his dream of being with his first love. Until one day, Theodore found a pregnancy test stick. When he saw it, he completely lost his mind. Chapter 1. Curled up under the covers, Rosalie Yang gently caressed her belly. After a while, she breathed a sigh of relief. Thankfully, the baby was okay. When he came home last night, Theodore Spencer had wanted to be intimate. As the couple hadn't seen each other for 2 months, Rosalie couldn't bear to refuse him. Theodore had already woken up and washed up. He was wearing a gray custom suit that perfectly fit his tall and slender body, giving him an elegant and charming air. Currently, he was sitting in a chair with a tablet in hand. His fingers slid gracefully across the screen, exuding a hint of laziness and sensuality.
When Theodore noticed her staring at him, he calmly asked, "Are you awake? Let's have breakfast."
"Okay." In the dining room, Rosalie kept pushing her food around her plate as she caressed her belly with one hand. After a while, she nervously spoke up, but Theodore also spoke at the same time. "I have something to tell you,"
the couple said simultaneously. The two fell silent and stared at each other. After a moment of silence, Theodore said, "Why don't you go first?"
"It's okay. You can go first," Rosalie replied, knowing that Theodore rarely took the initiative to talk to her about anything.
"I've had divorce papers drawn up, and I'll have someone send them to you later. If you don't like any of the terms, let me know, and I'll fix it. You should sign as soon as possible," said Theodore casually, as he leisurely cut into the omelet on his plate.
Rosalie froze and her mind immediately went blank. Even though she was sitting on a chair, she felt like she was about to fall. She even forgot to breathe. "We're getting a divorce?" she asked hoarsely, her tone tinged with disbelief. She secretly pinched her leg to see if she was dreaming.
"That's right." Theodore's tone was calm and devoid of any warmth.
Rosalie's mind was instantly muddled. Just last night they were doing the most intimate thing in the world, and now he was casually proposing a divorce. She covered her belly with slightly moist eyes. "What if we have?"
"Cynthia has returned, so our contractual marriage should end," Theodore declared.
Rosalie fell silent. The sweet life she shared with Theodore over the past year almost made her forget that their marriage had been a contractual one from the start. From the beginning, Rosalie knew that her husband's heart belonged to someone else, and she would eventually have to divorce him.
"Is there a problem with that?" Theodore asked, maintaining a calm and professional demeanor, as if he was discussing a business contract.
"No, there's no problem." Rosalie moved her hand from her belly to her leg, clutching her skirt tightly. Through the thin fabric, her nails almost pierced her palms because of how hard she was clenching her fists. Since her husband was going to divorce her, surely he didn't want this child, right? That woman would be unhappy if he did.
"Oh, and tell Grandma you want to divorce me because you have no feelings for me and aren't happy with this marriage," Theodore added.
Rosalie forced a smile and nodded. Okay. If Theodore brought up the matter of divorce to his grandmother, the elderly lady would surely get angry. Seeing Rosalie's calm response, Theodore's lips curled into a smile. It was hard to tell if he was relaxed or mocking her.
"Well, that's also the truth. You were never happy, and now you can be free."
"Yeah," Rosalie replied softly. Her throat felt as heavy as lead and she struggled to respond. Perhaps this was for the best. At least Theodore wouldn't feel burdened.
Theodore frowned slightly. It was as if he had gained some understanding after hearing her answer. He hummed softly and said, "All right then."
"Tap-to-do." Rosalie lowered her head, smiling bitterly. What else could she ask for? She was sure she had exhausted all the luck in her life to get a chance to marry the man before her. Her parents were ordinary employees at SK Enterprise. They had been trapped in the control room during a fire, but had managed to shut down the critical systems before they died. Their actions prevented the release of toxic substances and avoided more casualties. The media had reported on the incident for several days straight, sharing recordings of her parents' last conversation with the outside world. Orphaned at the age of 10, Rosalie was taken in by her aunt, who was the only option available. However, the woman smoked, drank, and gambled. A year later, Rosalie's aunt squandered all the money SK Enterprise had given the young girl to compensate for the loss of her parents. When Rosalie was 11 years old, her aunt dumped her at the doorstep of SK Enterprise. Clutching her backpack tightly to her chest, Rosalie waited at the company's entrance for 2 days. She was hungry and tired but had nowhere else to go. Finally, when the chairman of SK Enterprise saw her as he passed by, he took her home. From then on, he provided for Rosalie, taking care of everything from her education to her daily needs. Eventually, he had her marry his grandson, Theodore. Theodore didn't oppose the marriage, but he privately told Rosalie, "Even if we get married, I can't give you affection. If Cynthia comes back, our marriage will end. You can't object when that time comes." Rosalie's heart ached at his words. It was as if he had taken a knife and stabbed her heart. But she knew that if she refused to marry him, his grandmother, Rebecca Jarvis, would definitely blame Theodore and wouldn't let it go. Rebecca might even ruin her health out of anger. So even though it hurt, Rosalie could only nod and bear it. "No problem. Anyway, I only see you as a brother. I don't have any romantic feelings for you. If you want a divorce, just tell me anytime. I won't hold you back," she had said. That was how their marriage began. After they got married, Theodore treated Rosalie like a precious treasure. Everyone thought he loved her very much, but she knew he was only doing these things because he was a responsible man. He treated her kindly out of duty, not love. Now that duty had ended. Rosalie finished the last bite of egg on her plate and stood up. "I'm full. I'm going back to the room." She stood up, pulled out the chair, and was about to leave. However, as she stood up, she realized her head felt heavy and her feet light. She stepped forward too quickly. With a twist of her foot, she tumbled forward. Instinctively, she covered her belly. She panicked and tried to stop her fall, but she was suddenly lifted up and cradled in a pair of strong arms.
"What's the rush? Are you hurt?" Theodore carefully checked her body. When he found nothing wrong, he breathed a sigh of relief. "Don't do this again. You're all grown up, but you're still like a child," he said with a hint of reproach.
"I'm fine. Maybe I didn't sleep well last night," Rosalie said, avoiding his gaze. What was the point of his concern? Rosalie tried to shake off his hand, but Theodore seemed to sense something and furrowed his brow. He lifted her higher and more securely in his arms. A startled Rosalie instinctively wrapped her arms around his neck. "What are you doing?"
"I'm carrying you so you won't fall again."
"I'm fine. Put me down, okay? This isn't appropriate."
"What's not appropriate about it?"
"We're getting a divorce."
Theodore looked at her blankly. A hint of displeasure flickered briefly in his eyes. "We still need to sign the papers. We're still husband and wife before that happens. Or are you trying to say that you never wanted me to touch you from the beginning, and now you can't wait to keep wide distance?" His tone was somewhat harsh. He made it sound as if the divorce was something she had coldly proposed, something he could only reluctantly accept.
Chapter 3. I didn't mean it that way, Rosalie snapped, feeling a bit angry. If she had meant it like that, she wouldn't have let him touch her last night, especially since she was pregnant. Without saying anything else, Theodore carried her back to the bedroom and placed her gently on the bed. His movements were tender and caring, causing Rosalie to desperately hold back her tears. As he straightened her clothes, his large hands inadvertently brushed against her belly. Rosalie's heart skipped a beat. She quickly grabbed his hand and pushed it away. Her lower abdomen was still very flat, but instinctively she felt guilty and was worried about being discovered.
Theodore paused at her actions. What's wrong? Was she not letting him touch her now because they were about to get a divorce?
It's nothing. I just didn't sleep well and am feeling a bit dizzy, Rosalie explained, giving an excuse.
Shall I call a doctor? You don't look too good. Theodore reached out and touched her forehead. She didn't feel warm, and her temperature was normal, but he still felt like something was off.
I'm really fine. Rosalie couldn't risk having a doctor come over now, lest they discover her pregnancy. I just need to sleep. I'll be fine after a nap.
Rose, I'll give you one last chance. Either tell me the truth, or I'll take you to the hospital. Did she think he didn't know that she was hiding something?
Rosalie forced a smile. It's just that it's been a while since we've been intimate. It's taking me a while to recover because we did it so suddenly last night. You don't have to take me to the hospital. I'll be fine after I get some rest. It'll be awkward to go to the hospital when there's nothing wrong with me.
Upon hearing her reasonable explanation, a hint of embarrassment flashed in the man's eyes. He immediately pulled up the blanket to cover her. You should have said so earlier. You didn't have to get up. I could have brought breakfast to bed for you.
Rosalie clenched her fists under the blanket, holding back her tears. He was so cruel. How could he care for her like this after proposing a divorce? Theodore raised his hand and glanced at the time on his watch. Looked like he had something to attend to. Honey, no, Mr. Spencer. If you have something to do, go ahead. I'll be fine after I get some rest.
Theodore frowned at the way she addressed him. She had never called him that before. What did you call me? Theodore sounded calm, but his tone carried a hint of restrained anger.
Rosalie hardened her heart and said, We're getting divorced, so it's better to adapt early. If we accidentally call each other too affectionately after the divorce, others might misunderstand. Finding her words grating, Theodore stood up and turned to leave without another word. Almost simultaneously, Rosalie turned her body, tears silently streaming down her face.
Theodore's footsteps suddenly halted, and he turned back to his wife. Rose, you've always seen me as a brother, haven't you?
Rosalie was slightly startled at his question. Why was he bringing this up now? She discreetly wiped away the tears on her face before looking up at Theodore. What?
Before we got married, you said you had no romantic feelings for me and that you only saw me as a brother.
Yeah, I did say that.
Your feelings haven't changed, right? You don't have any romantic feelings for me, and you only see me as a brother, don't you?
Staying silent, Rosalie clutched the bedsheet tightly, her knuckles turning white. She bit her lip hard, tears flowing incessantly as she struggled to control her trembling body. When she first laid eyes on Theodore at the age of 11, she had been drawn to him. His eyes seemed to hold the beauty of the entire galaxy. They got engaged at 19 and she married him at 20. Now she was 21 years old. Since the start, her feelings for him had never wavered. Instead, they had grown deeper with time. Although they had only been married for a year, they had been together for 10 years. He was her entire youth, and no one else could ever hold her heart. It was as if she had been poisoned and he was her antidote.
Why aren't you answering me? Is there something you can't say?
Chapter 4. Yes, I still see you as a brother, just like you see me as a sister, Rosalie managed to say, her throat growing increasingly tight. Rosalie's throat grew increasingly tight, to the point where she could hardly produce another sound. If she could, she would have lifted the covers and rushed into his arms. She would tearfully tell him, "I've never seen you as a brother. I love you." Instead, she restrained herself from doing something so pathetic. His heart belonged to another woman. Since that was the case, why should she lower herself and beg him like that?
That's good. Now, you can find a man you truly love, Theodore said calmly, with a faint smile.
Rosalie's heart ached painfully again, but she forced a smile. Yeah. That's great. Theodore could openly be with his first love now.
Rose, he suddenly called out.
Yeah. Rosalie managed to reply in a strained tone.
Theodore suddenly stopped.
Rosalie remained silent as she waited for him to continue.
I'm leaving first. Get some rest, okay? With that, Theodore turned and left.
Rosalie wrapped herself in the blanket and started crying. Afraid of being heard, she tightly covered her mouth with her hands. She felt as if she was suffocating. The drowning sense of despair she felt made her wish she could leave this world right now. After what felt like an eternity, someone knocked on the door. Rosalie opened her weary eyes and hoarsely asked, "Who is it?" "Madam, Mr. Fletcher is here." The butler's voice came from outside. Instantly, Rosalie felt wide awake. She went to the bathroom and freshened up, then put on some light makeup to make herself look less disheveled. Just as she was about to leave the room, her phone rang. Picking it up from the bedside, she saw a text message from Theodore. "Yvonne should be there now. If there's anything you want to add to the divorce papers, you can discuss it with him." Rosalie couldn't help but tear up again. She deleted the message without replying. It would be a lie to say she felt no resentment towards Theodore. She walked neatly into the living room and stood in front of Yvonne, looking beautiful and spirited. "Yvonne, you're here," she greeted. Yvonne had thought that she would be heartbroken after Theodore asked for a divorce. Though when he recalled something that Theodore had previously drunkenly told him, Yvonne seemed to understand Rosalie's current behavior. "Well, give it here and I'll sign it," Rosalie said bluntly. It seemed that Rosalie's heart did indeed belong to someone else. But what kind of man could compare to someone like Theodore? Yvonne couldn't help but wonder about that even as he pulled out the documents. "Madam, here are the divorce papers. After the divorce you will receive." Yvonne continued to read through the generous divorce compensation in a flat tone. Theodore had written that she would receive the villa, the cars, money, jewelry, and gold. But Rosalie didn't listen to a word. She seemed lost in thought. She didn't want anything. He just wanted Theodore. Was that possible? Suddenly she laughed. Perhaps when sadness reached its peak, it turned into laughter. Somewhat shocked, Yvonne stopped talking. Theodore and Rosalie were about to divorce. Yet Rosalie was happy? Rosalie stopped laughing. "Sorry. It seems that I'll be a rich woman after my divorce." Yvonne remained silent. "So Rosalie only wanted money?" "Madam, I haven't finished reading yet. According to the rules, I have to read everything out." "Please wait a moment," Yvonne continued. But when he reached the next sentence, he suddenly said, "Oh no." He closed the file. "You can't sign this agreement." Seeing Yvonne's serious expression, a confused Rosalie asked, "Why?" Chapter 5. Yvonne straightened up and said, "There are typos in the documents. I need to take them back for corrections, sorry." Rosalie fell silent. Typos? For a moment she had thought things would turn around for her. As she was still clinging to ridiculous fantasies. After Yvonne left, Rosalie returned to her room. She didn't know how she had endured this day. She had eaten lunch and dinner properly. She hadn't experienced severe morning sickness yet, but perhaps due to excessive sadness or overeating, she vomited particularly violently that night. She cried while vomiting. In the end, she curled up on the floor as she trembled violently. It was almost midnight. In the past, if Theodore had something to do and couldn't return home by 10 o'clock, he would always call her to let her know where he was. It looked like he wouldn't be doing it anymore. Suddenly, a ringtone echoed through the room. As the ringtone echoed louder and clearer, Rosalie's ears perked up. She scrambled up from the floor and dashed out of the bathroom, grabbing her phone from the bed. She checked the caller ID to see it read, "Theo, honey." A bright smile instantly came to her face. Wiping her tears, she took a deep breath and cleared her throat before answering the phone. "Hello."
Why didn't you reply to my message today? Theodore sounded somewhat gloomy, like he was interrogating her. Rosalie hadn't expected him to ask that. Yuvin had already arrived, so I didn't reply. I didn't think it was necessary, she replied softly. Is that so? The man's voice was calm yet oppressive. It's gotten to the point where you don't think it's necessary to reply to my messages anymore? It's no wonder you laughed so happily when you were about to sign the papers today. Rosalie clenched her fists, her palms sweating. Yuvin must have told him. She stuttered. Before she could respond, he asked, "Are you happy that we're getting a divorce?" Rosalie fell silent, her eyes welling up with tears. "Why aren't you saying anything?" he asked again. Although his voice sounded calm, Rosalie felt a compelling force behind it. I was just happy that you gave me so much. I didn't expect you to be so generous," Rosalie blurted out, grasping for any reason. Theodore suddenly fell silent. After a while, he finally said, "You've been with me for a year and gave me everything you had. I couldn't shortchange you." Rosalie raised her hand to cover her mouth, desperately trying to keep her tears from spilling over. "Thank you. Yuvin said there were some typos in the papers today, so I haven't signed them yet," she said. Fearing Theodore would be displeased at this, she quickly added, "Don't worry. As soon as the documents are fixed, I'll sign them immediately." She was afraid he would think she was deliberately dragging things out. "I know. The divorce papers need some further adjustments. There are some procedural issues with the properties involved, so it might take a few more days. But those properties will still be yours. Once everything is sorted out, you won't have any further trouble with them," Theodore replied. Rosalie felt stifled. They had known each other for over a decade, and he thought she only cared about money. "Tell me if you want anything else," Theodore said. "Apart from these material things, I can't offer you anything else." If Rosalie clenched her hands any tighter, her nails would pierce her palms. Couldn't he give her a complete family? Rosalie wished she could ask that of him. Sometimes his kindness made her believe he cared about her. As she caressed her stomach, a surge of courage came over her. Were the typos in the divorce papers today a sign? Even if he didn't want her, she wanted him to know about this child's existence. "Where are you now?" Rosalie asked. "Do you need something?" Theodore countered, avoiding a direct answer.
"Theo, Before Rosalie could finish, she heard a woman's voice coming from Theodore's side of the call. "Theo, I filled the bathtub with warm water. Come and take a bath." The soft and pleasant voice was terribly ill-timed.
Chapter 6. Rosalie's mind suddenly went blank. "You're what?" Theodore asked. Rosalie closed her eyes in despair. Earlier today, he had accused her of being impatient to sever ties with him, insisting they were not divorced yet. But clearly, he was the one who was eager to be with Cynthia. "I'm tired. I'm going to sleep." The cruel reality shattered Rosalie's courage. She could never match up to Cynthia. She wasn't even worthy of being the other woman's opponent because, to Theodore, Cynthia was the only one for him. To think Rosalie still wanted to salvage this marriage. It was truly laughable. "All right, get some sleep." Theodore's voice remained indifferent, devoid of any discernible emotion.
After ending the call, Rosalie collapsed on the bed and wept bitterly. "Theo, I'm 2 months pregnant," she muttered. The next day Rosalie woke up feeling groggy. Checking the time, she noted it was already noon. Her body felt sore as she got out of bed. Just as she finished washing up, the phone rang. It was Rebecca. "Hello, Grandma." "Rose, why does your voice sound hoarse? Are you sick?" Rebecca asked with concern. "I'm fine, I just slept a bit late last night." "And Theo? Is he with you?" Rebecca frowned. "He just went out." "Went out?" Rebecca frowned. "He's not with you on your birthday? That's very unlike him." Rosalie fell silent. Right, today was her birthday. But for her, birthdays didn't mean much anymore. If Rebecca hadn't called her today, she would have forgotten. Theodore probably didn't care either. "Grandma, it's not like that. He's been out personally preparing something for me. He said he wants to surprise me." "Is that so?" "I'll have to ask him about it," Rebecca said skeptically. "Grandma, please don't pressure him. Let him focus on preparing for my birthday. Even if you don't trust him, you trust me, right?" Upon hearing Rosalie's aggrieved tone, Rebecca softened. "All right, I misunderstood. It's good he remembered your birthday. You two enjoy your time together tonight. Your parents and I won't disturb you." Rosalie nodded as she blushed. "Okay." After the call ended, Rosalie stayed alone in her room, feeling immensely lost and guilty as she really didn't want to deceive Rebecca. After a while, her good friend Stephanie Carter called to wish her a happy birthday. Full of grievances but unable to confide in Steph, Rosalie continued to lie, saying she was spending the day with her husband. 2 hours later, Rebecca called again asking if Theodore had returned. Rosalie could only repeat that her husband wanted to surprise her, and she was about to go meet him. Not knowing where to go and not wanting to see anyone, she booked a hotel room and stayed there alone, flipping through channels on the TV to pass the time. Suddenly, a gossip news segment flashed on screen, showing Theodore opening the car door for a mysterious woman who was clinging to his arm and whispering something in his ear. The two seemed very intimate. Though the camera didn't capture the woman's face, Rosalie recognized her. Who else but that woman would Theodore be so gentle with? Rosalie felt like her heart was being torn apart. It was as if someone had pulled her soul out of her body. A comedy variety show aired after that. However, Rosalie remained expressionless throughout the show, unable to muster a single smile. Chapter 7. In the evening, Rosalie went to a restaurant alone and ordered a meal, forcing herself to eat something for the sake of her unborn child. Her plan was to return to her room after dinner and concoct a story to tell Rebecca the next day, to reassure the old woman that she and Theodore had spent a wonderful night together. Suddenly, she saw a familiar figure not far away walking out of the restaurant. Cynthia. Accompanying her were a man and a woman. The three of them chatted, shook hands, and walked out together. But where was Theodore? "Miss, sorry to disturb you. Are you alone?" a waiter asked. Rosalie snapped out of her thoughts. "Yeah. Do you need something?" "There's a gentleman who wants to dine here, but there's a queue of waiting guests and limited seating. So, may I ask if you would be willing to share your table with him? If not, it's okay." Rosalie turned her head and saw a well-dressed man not far away. He looked quite handsome and elegant. "It's fine," Rosalie replied. She was about to finish her meal anyway. "All right. Thank you, miss." Soon after the waiter spoke to the man, Sebastian Carter, he walked over to Rosalie's side with a smile on his face. "Sorry about this, miss. I didn't make a reservation, so there's no available seating. But I really wanted to try this restaurant's specialties. It's difficult to get a reservation at this restaurant. There was a cancellation today, so I was lucky." "Please have a seat," Rosalie replied politely. As Sebastian calmly sat opposite Rosalie, He noted that she was wearing a blue dress, with her black hair tied up and wisps of curls hanging down on both sides of her cheeks. She looked quite charming and lively. Though she was smiling, her expression somehow seemed sorrowful. "Is there something on my face?" asked Rosalie, feeling a bit uneasy at Sebastian's scrutiny. "I'm sorry. I just thought you seemed a bit sad." "I'm not." Her heart was already broken. There was no room left for sadness.
"Sorry, I must have assumed too much," Sebastian replied, after which he dropped the matter. Not far away, a sports car was parked outside the restaurant. A man emerged from a nearby pharmacy and approached the vehicle. He opened the door and was about to get in, but suddenly noticed a familiar figure sitting by the restaurant's glass window. Wasn't that Theodore's wife? Who was the man opposite her? What the hell? Caleb Finch immediately took out his phone and recorded a 15-second video, then quickly sent it to Theodore, accompanied by a text message. "Bro, take a look at this. Is your wife cheating on you? She got all dolled up and is out on a date with a handsome guy in the middle of the night. Don't worry, man. I've got your back. I'll straighten this out for you."
As she didn't have much of an appetite, Rosalie quickly finished her meal. She wiped her mouth with a napkin. "I'm done, so I'll leave first." Suddenly, a voice rang out.
Well. Who do we have here? I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me."
Hearing the familiar voice, Rosalie turned her head, somewhat surprised. "Caleb, why are you here?"
Am I interrupting something? Caleb's gaze was sharp as a sword as he glared at Sebastian. "Who are you? Do you know she's married?" Sebastian seemed somewhat taken aback. "You're married?"
Rosalie nodded before turning back to Caleb. "I don't know this gentleman. I came alone, but the restaurant was full, so we shared a table. I was just about to leave." Having explained, Rosalie tried to brush past Caleb, but he stepped forward and blocked her path.
"Wait a minute."
Chapter 8. Rosalie frowned, seeming a bit impatient. "Do you need something else?" She was clearly innocent and heartbroken because of her husband. However, her husband's friend was treating her as if she were the one having an affair.
Sharing a table? A handsome man and a beautiful woman, one dressed to the nines and the other in a sharp suit, just happened to both come to this restaurant alone. Then, there just happened to be no seats, so you shared a table. Do you think I'm stupid? Sebastian stepped forward to explain, "I really don't know this lady. You're misunderstanding the situation. I wasn't talking to you." "Shut up," Caleb said bluntly. Sebastian remained calm, his expression unusually cool.
"You're very rude," Rosalie said with a deep frown. "Believe it or not, the facts remain the same."
"That's easy to say. Rosalie, do you even know that Caleb paused and glanced at the man next to him. "Do you have something else to say?" Sebastian smiled and politely excused himself. "Sorry, I'll be going now." Before leaving, he glanced at Rosalie again with a hint of puzzlement in his eyes.
"Caleb, I know you've always disliked me." "Think what you want," said Rosalie. She turned to leave, not wanting to defend herself further.
"Theo drank a lot last night, you know," Caleb said to her back.
Rosalie halted and turned around. "What?" But she suddenly remembered something. "Yeah. He must have been ecstatic last night, so drinking a lot is normal."
Seeing Rosalie so composed, Caleb's brows furrowed even tighter. He wanted to explode, but she was his friend's wife. If Theodore found out Caleb had dared to scold his woman, he would tear him apart. "Do you want to come with me to see him?" Caleb asked.
"No need, I have other things to do." Seeing him would only add to her sorrow.
"Rosalie, you're so heartless. You don't even care about your husband. He's been staying at my place for the past 2 days, drunk as hell."
Rosalie's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? Hadn't he been with Cynthia last night? Cynthia even personally drew him a bath." They must have taken a bath together.
I don't feel like explaining to you. He's not doing well now. If you want to see him, come with me. If you want to remain heartless, I won't stop you.
As Caleb walked away, Rosalie noticed he was holding a bag of medicine. A bad feeling came over her and she quickly followed after him. Wait a minute. What's the medicine for? She asked, staring at the bag.
For fun, Caleb replied sarcastically.
Rosalie was puzzled.
Seriously? People buy medicine for treating illnesses. Why else would I buy it? Caleb was grumpy and behaving like he had a huge grudge against Rosalie.
Are you sick? Rosalie asked.
Not me. It's for your husband.
Rosalie became anxious at Caleb's words. What's wrong with him? Why does he need medicine?
Don't you know?
Is he sick?
Caleb couldn't help but laugh. Your husband knows your menstrual cycle better than you do, and you don't even know he needs medicine.
I really didn't know. Can you tell me about it? Caleb got into the car without responding to her, and Rosalie quickly got into the passenger seat. Caleb drove Rosalie to a high-end apartment in the city center. In the bustling Ashwick city, an ordinary person couldn't afford a single square meter even if they didn't eat or drink for a year. However, for someone like Caleb, this was just one of his many residences. When they arrived at his unit, Caleb entered the password and opened the door. He walked in but realized that Rosalie had remained at the entrance. He turned around.
What's wrong? Come in.
Chapter 9. Is anyone else inside? Rosalie was very worried that Cynthia was there. If they bumped into each other, it would be awkward.
Caleb frowned. Who do you think would be inside?
Rosalie pursed her lips. Never mind. Caleb gave her a cold glance and walked in. As soon as Rosalie entered, a strong smell of alcohol hit her. Theodore was lying on a windowsill not far away. He had one leg hanging over the edge, almost falling out, and there were all sorts of bottles and broken glasses on the floor.
How did you get all the way there? Caleb exclaimed. He rushed over and pulled Theodore's dangling leg off the windowsill, then pushed his friend into the room, fearing he would fall and get hurt. Caleb turned his head and looked at Rosalie, who was in a daze. Why are you just standing there? Come over here and help me.
Rosalie put down her bag and ran over immediately. Theodore reeked of alcohol and half his shirt buttons were undone. The completely drunk man was frowning deeply and breathing heavily. With his pale face, he truly resembled an unrestrained drunkard. Even so, his disheveled appearance did not diminish his perfect image in the slightest, but rather added a touch of decadent wildness. Rosalie reached out and touched his forehead, which seemed a bit hot. She was unsure if it was from drinking too much or because he had a fever. Why did he get drunk? Was it because of Cynthia? That woman had already returned, right? Why the need to do this? Why didn't you stop him? You actually let him drink so much? Rosalie asked with a frown.
What? You're blaming me? Caleb pointed at himself. Are you serious? You're his wife. Your husband was the one who didn't go home and got wasted outside. Why didn't you stop him?
Rosalie trailed off. After a long while, she finally spoke. He was with Cynthia. He was probably happy, so how could I disturb him?
What? Are you crazy? Are you saying your husband was out with another woman and you didn't care? Are you a saintess or something? Caleb roared.
We're getting a divorce. Rosalie smiled bitterly, suppressing the pain in her heart. So I can't say anything about whoever he's with.
Divorce? Caleb was stunned. No wonder Theodore drank until he was in this state. It's all because of you.
Because of me. You're wrong,
Caleb interrupted her. Shut up. How has Theo wronged you? How could you abandon him? Since marrying you, he hasn't flirted with anyone else or done anything improper. No matter what, he always thinks of you first. Even when he's drinking with his buddies, he pushes away any woman who attempts to come near him. He keeps an eye on the time, wanted to go back early to be with you, afraid you'll be worried at home. He has distanced himself from everyone for you. Can't you see how good he is to you? Even if you don't. We aren't blind. You want to divorce such a man? Are you crazy? Caleb took a deep breath and placed his hands on his hips. Go on, tell me, what kind of devil out there has managed to seduce you and make you heartless enough to leave your husband? I'll beat him up and kill him.
Rosalie was surprised at Caleb's indignant attitude. I remember when I married him, you made a bet with a few of your friends. You said Theo would flirt around and grow tired of me in less than 3 months. You lost $5 million and were forced to sing folk songs naked. You've been holding a grudge against me for that, she reminded him.
Caleb fell silent. He scratched his head and glanced around awkwardly before saying, Don't mention that again. Also, I was wearing underwear.
I know. You were wearing a pair of red briefs, Rosalie added. I watched the video. You were quite sassy.
Video? Where did you see the video? Who took it? Tell me.
Filled with a surge of explosive anger, a wide-eyed Caleb stepped forward and gripped Rosalie's shoulders, causing her to wince as he squeezed her hard. Let go of me.
Tell me quickly. Who the hell recorded the video? As the noisy voices buzzed in his ears, Theodore slowly opened his eyes. Despite his blurry vision, he was able to make out a familiar figure. He immediately launched himself off the windowsill and rushed forward. Pulling Rosalie behind him, he grabbed Caleb's collar and threw a punch. Chapter 10. Bam! Theodore threw Caleb to the ground and started punching him continuously, causing a visible trickle of blood to ooze from the corner of Caleb's mouth. Theodore, are you nuts? Caleb yelled, not fighting back against his good friend and only defending himself. Caleb, how dare you touch her? Theodore roared. With his bloodshot eyes, he resembled a rabid beast. Even Caleb was taken aback by his appearance. Theo, you got it all wrong. Bam! Theodore threw another punch. Caleb couldn't take it anymore. Theodore Spencer, are you blind? Do you even know what she did to you? Caleb flipped over and wrestled with Theodore. The fight was fierce, as both men were strong, well-built, and trained regularly. The sober Caleb made sure to pull his punches when he struck, but Theo was drunk and didn't hold back at all.
Rosalie was frantic as she watched the two men rolling towards the broken glass on the ground. Stop it, she yelled. Rosalie rushed over and attempted to pull them apart, only to be forcefully shoved aside. At the sound of her scream as she fell to the ground, the two men abruptly stopped fighting and turned to look at her. When Rosalie raised her arm, she saw that she had grazed the skin on her wrist. It wasn't a severe injury, but it was quite painful.
Theodore instantly rushed to Rosalie's side and gathered her into his arms. I'm sorry. Are you okay? Holding her hand carefully, he gently blew on the wound. His face was filled with remorse, and he wished he could hold her even closer than he already was. Filled with guilt and frustration, Theodore kept apologizing. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. So, women are everything, and friends are just punching bags to you, huh? Caleb sneered as he got up, wiping the blood from his mouth. He angrily pointed at Rosalie. Did you see that? We've been good friends for over a decade, but he almost killed me for your sake. Yet, you were on a date with another man tonight. You're a heartless woman. Theodore's drunken eyes seemed to clear up a bit as he silently stared at the woman in his arms, Caleb's last words echoing in his mind.
Rosalie looked up at the man before her, unable to resist gently touching his face. He was the one who had initiated the divorce, so why was he here getting drunk and fighting for her? Suddenly, Theodore gently kissed her fingertips as he softly asked,
Cindy, does it hurt?
Rosalie's hazy gaze froze completely upon hearing Cynthia's nickname. Even Caleb, who was sitting up beside them, had surprise flickering in his eyes.
I'm sorry I scared you, Cindy. I won't do it again. Theodore hugged her tightly, his face full of remorse.
All the warmth in Rosalie's heart was brutally shattered at that moment. Gritting her teeth, she forcefully pushed the man holding her away and stood up. I'm not Cynthia. I'm Rosalie. She didn't know how much effort it took to keep herself from breaking down hysterically. Looking up at her, Theodore shakily got to his feet, then suddenly smiled.
Sorry, Rose. I mistook you for someone else.
Chapter 11. So, Theodore had only intervened because he thought Caleb was bullying Ointhia? She was indeed naive, ridiculously so. Despite her efforts to hold back her tears, she couldn't stop some from falling. Wiping them away, she smiled faintly. It's okay. We were wrong from the beginning. This incident doesn't make any difference. At her words, the atmosphere suddenly plunged into a terrifying stalemate. Caleb felt like he had nowhere to hide. He glanced around and even considered jumping out of the window. It was too awkward. After a long silence, Rosalie spoke again. I don't know why you drank so much. Maybe you were too happy. Anyway, we're getting divorced, so I have no right to intervene. I'm leaving. Rosalie was about to turn away when Theodore grabbed her wrist.
I'll take you back.
His once drunkenly hazy eyes became clear when he looked at her. Rosalie forcefully shook his hand off. No need. But I told Grandma we aren't going home tonight because we're out celebrating my birthday. So, when you see her, remember to tell her that we stayed at Heaton Hotel and had a great time tonight. With that, Rosalie turned and walked out quickly.
Theodore opened his empty palm, feeling like something had suddenly disappeared. Today was her birthday, but he had tossed her aside. Caleb glanced at him and said, I'll send her off. Theodore was too drunk to drive, while Caleb was injured, but sober. Though Caleb rushed into the elevator right after Rosalie and stood behind her, she acted as if he didn't exist at all. Caleb scratched his head awkwardly. I didn't expect him to mistake you for Cynthia. It's not my business. It's all his fault. I'll take you back, okay? Let's go directly to the parking lot.
Rosalie still didn't acknowledge him. She got out of the elevator on the ground floor and went straight to the intersection, flagging down a taxi. It seemed she wouldn't ride in Caleb's car at all. Suddenly, a figure brushed past Caleb and entered the taxi, sitting beside Rosalie. Rosalie turned her head in shock. How did you get here? Why are you here? Rosalie asked, frowning. Going home, Theodore, who seemed a bit more sober, but still had the smell of alcohol clinging to him, replied calmly. Rosalie found his words incredibly ironic. Both remained silent throughout the journey. Upon reaching their destination, the two got out of the car. Instinctively, Theodore reached for Rosalie's hand, but she forcefully shook it off. He stumbled and almost fell, though it was unclear whether it was because she had exerted too much force or if he had drunk too much. A startled Rosalie hurriedly tried to support him, but in response, Theodore used the momentum to pull her into his arms. In an instant they were pressed close together. His warm breath, tinged with heavy alcohol, brushed against her face as he spoke in a tone akin to addressing a mischievous child.
What's wrong? Are you mad at me?
Pressed against his chest, Rosalie's heart raced. Let me go.
Why won't you let me hold your hand?
Rosalie couldn't help but chuckle in exasperation. Because we're getting divorced.
Chapter 12. So, what if we're getting divorced? Didn't you say you see me as a brother? Theodore said.
Since I see you as a brother, we shouldn't be this intimate. It's inappropriate, Rosalie countered. Suddenly, an elderly voice rang out. What's going on? Who's being inappropriate? They turned to see Rebecca leaning on her cane, being assisted by the butler as she approached. "Look at you two. You're not even inside the house yet and are already hugging so tightly. That's really inappropriate," Rebecca remarked. In fact, she was actually delighted to see her grandson and granddaughter-in-law being so affectionate. Rosalie immediately broke free from Theodore's embrace and went to Rebecca's side. "Grandma, why are you out so late?" she asked, holding the older woman's arm. Judging from Rebecca's behavior, it seemed she hadn't heard Rosalie and Theodore talking about their divorce earlier. Otherwise, she wouldn't be so calm. "I was bored, so I came to see if Theo really took you out for your birthday," Rebecca said. She had been a bit skeptical about her grandson, so she came to check herself. "Oh, you two were supposed to be out, weren't you?" Rebecca asked, puzzled. "We had enough fun outside and decided to come back home." "Home is always better than anywhere else," Rosalie replied, quickly providing a reasonable excuse. "That's true," Rebecca said as she patted Rosalie's hand. "Nowhere's better than home. No matter what happens, always remember to come home." Rebecca motioned for Theodore to come closer. When he did, she frowned. "How much have you had to drink?" "Grandma, it's my birthday today, so I let him have a few extra drinks." "It's all my fault," Rosalie interjected. "Oh, child. Why do you always take the blame for everything? I'm sure he's the one who couldn't hold back from drinking." Rebecca's cold gaze shifted to Theodore, but he remained silent, his gaze fixed on Rosalie. Noticing her grandson's subtle glance at her granddaughter-in-law, a smile played at the corners of the old woman's mouth. She took Theodore's hand and placed it on the back of Rosalie's hand. "Theo and Rose, seeing you two being so affectionate makes me feel relieved. As long as you two are together, this is home. Without either of you, it's not home. Do you understand?" Rosalie's nose tingled as she fought back tears and nodded vigorously. "Yes, Grandma, I understand." "All right then, I won't disturb you two anymore. I'll head back now. Enjoy your time together. By the way, I got you a gift. It's in your room. Go take a look when you get a chance," Rebecca said, feeling reassured after seeing them getting along. Rebecca had been feeling uneasy these past few days, as if something was about to happen to Theodore and Rebecca, so she was keeping a close eye on them. "Grandma, why don't you stay here tonight?" Rosalie suggested. "No need. My place is not far anyway. The driver is waiting. I'll head off first. You two take care of yourselves," Rebecca said, patting their hands before leaving with the butler's support. The two of them watched Rebecca's car until it disappeared from sight. Rosalie was about to leave when she noticed Theodore struggling to stand steadily, so she went to support him. Theodore instinctively wrapped his arm around her waist and leaned weakly against her. Once in the room, Rosalie helped Theodore sit on the edge of the bed, then went into the bathroom. After a while, she emerged and said, "I've prepared a bath for you. Wash up and get some rest." Theodore looked up and stared at her but remained silent for a while. Rosalie approached him and said, "You should go take a bath first. I'll go to the kitchen and make you some soup. It'll help you feel better since you drank so much." Even though they were getting a divorce, Rosalie couldn't bring herself to stop caring for him. As she was about to leave, Theodore suddenly grabbed her arm.
Chapter 13. "You're hurt," said Theodore, staring at his wife's wrist. The abrasion on her wrist was shallow, but it seemed deeply etched in his eyes.
"I'm fine. I'll put on a Band-Aid later. You go ahead and take a shower."
"Let's shower together." Theodore looked up and calmly gazed at her. He said those words as naturally as he had brought up getting a divorce. Throughout their marriage, the couple often showered together, and sometimes they couldn't resist.
Staring into Theodore's dark eyes, Rosalie felt flustered and confused, but she still forcefully pulled her hand away. "It's fine. You go ahead and shower." Since they had chosen to get divorced, there was no point in being tender to each other now. Theodore's hand was suddenly empty. When he returned to his senses, Rosalie had already left the room. When Rosalie walked into the room carrying a bowl of soup, she found that Theodore hadn't come out of the bathroom yet. Concerned, she went to the bathroom to check on him, only to find an amusing yet exasperating scene before her. Theodore was actually asleep in the bathtub. His clothes were strewn on the floor and his phone was discarded to the side. Picking them up, Rosalie put the clothes in the laundry hamper and gently nudged her husband's shoulder. Theodore furrowed his brow, seemingly disturbed from his slumber. Behaving like a grumpy child, he ignored her, pushing her hand away and turning around. But he had seemingly forgotten that he was in a bathtub, not a bed. When he turned, he plopped right into it. Water splashed everywhere, soaking Rosalie's clothes. She wiped the water off her face and quickly reached out to pull Theodore out of the bathtub, afraid the drunken fool would drown. "Theo, wake up." Despite everything that had happened, he still hadn't sobered up. If she had come in 5 minutes later, would he have drowned? Though they had only been married for a year, she had known him for 10 years. She had never seen the high and mighty handsome Theo in such a sorry state. Rosalie exerted all her strength to pull Theodore out of the bathtub. Half dazed, he stumbled out of the bathroom with her help. After she dried the water off his body and blow-dried his hair, she sat next to him on the bed to feed him the soup. Just as he took a sip, he spat it out like a naughty baby. Frowning, Rosalie quickly grabbed a tissue to wipe his mouth. "Why did you spit it out?"
Theodore had his eyes closed as he muttered, "Tastes bad."
Theodore had his eyes closed as he muttered, "Tastes bad." Rosalie couldn't help but laugh at him, asking, "But alcohol tastes good?" Rosalie fell silent. If anyone else saw Theodore being so childish, his reputation as a dignified CEO would probably be ruined. Rosalie shook her head helplessly, then scooped up another spoonful of soup and brought it to his lips. "Open up. You'll feel much better after drinking this." But Theodore evaded her, refusing like a stubborn child who wouldn't eat his food. Rosalie really wanted to spank him. Theodore collapsed onto the bed, half asleep. Rosalie sighed, thinking to herself that it was fine if he didn't want to drink the soup, but also worried that he might feel uncomfortable after drinking so much alcohol. Oh, damn her soft-heartedness. She took a sip of soup but didn't swallow it, then used her hand to open his mouth and leaned down to feed him mouth to mouth. As her soft lips touched his, Theodore slowly opened his eyes, and his hazy gaze was suddenly bright enough to illuminate the dark sky. With a gulp, he swallowed the soup Rosalie fed him. Seeing he was awake, Rosalie blushed and sat up straight, feeling embarrassed. "I just wanted you to drink this soup. Since you're awake, drink it yourself." Chapter 14. Theodore's long eyelashes fluttered. Then he closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep. Rosalie gently nudged his shoulder. No response. It seems this drunkard was alternating between being sober and being out of it. Rosalie had no choice but to resort to slowly feeding him mouth to mouth. Theodore didn't open his eyes again but swallowed everything. Just then, Theodore suddenly turned over and pulled her into his arms. The warmth of his embrace enveloped her instantly and filled her with a familiar feeling she cherished. After the divorce, this embrace would no longer belong to her but to Cynthia. "Honey," Rosalie whispered softly. She held Theodore's face and kissed him gently. "This will be the last time I address you in this way. From now on, those words belong to someone else. When the woman you truly love calls you that, you will be happier, won't you?" she thought to herself. Rosalie nestled into Theodore's embrace, holding him tightly and greedily inhaling his scent. Opportunities like this were few and far between. Soon she drifted into sleep.
"Happy birthday."
Rosalie was half asleep and a sentence seemed to echo in her ears. But she couldn't make out what it was. Her eyelids felt heavy and she didn't want to open them. Perhaps she had misheard. The next day, Rosalie woke up to find herself still lying in Theodore's arms. It felt incredulous, bittersweet, and suffocating. Theodore was already awake and staring at her.
"Are you awake? Do you want to sleep a little longer?" he asked.
His gentle tone gave Rosalie the illusion of them being the most affectionate couple in the world, never to be separated. As she drifted in a daze, she suddenly remembered the coldness and ruthlessness with which this man had asked for a divorce. It was like being splashed with cold water. She pulled away from his embrace. "Sorry, we should have slept separately last night. I was too tired and just lay down."
Theodore's initially gentle expression suddenly turned cold. He sat up and said icily, "You know we're not divorced yet, right?"
"What's the difference? Can't the divorce papers be finalized today?" Rosalie asked. Better to end it sooner rather than later. Otherwise, things would be difficult if he found out she was pregnant.
"Are you that eager to get divorced?" Theodore asked, his voice growing colder.